seems like it worked. Okay.
All right.
You can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Ming. I'm also a writer, and I specialize in speculative fiction. So I think fantasy is probably my favorite thing. And I love reading across all genres. I love science fiction. I don't know if I'm good enough to write it, but something else I love as well, which I guess is great because we're going to be talking about romance for this particular episode. Yeah, so me and Lynn know each other through Twitter. Lynn is fantastic. Her writing is fantastic and I love her. And so we were actually just chatting on Twitter about romances when, she invited me to come and do a little talk about it. Also a little bit of background information about me. I'm gray arrow ace. So what that means is I don't typically feel romantic or physical attraction for people. It doesn't mean always. I've dated two people before that I've had strong, romantic and physical attraction to. But overall, I don't really get crushes, and I don't really, kind of see someone and feel physically attracted to them. So there's a lot about romance. It's very complicated. People have written novels about how to write romance. So I think for us, it's going to be more of a casual going over some of the stuff that I think about when I write romance and Lynn thinks about when she writes romance, and also talk a little bit from my perspective as someone who doesn't really feel physical attraction. And so I think sometimes maybe how I handle romance may be a little bit different from someone who is allosexual and do feel physical attraction.
Okay, great. Wow, really nice intro.
Awesome.
So that was a perfect primer for what we're going to talk about today. My name is Lynn, as Ming just mentioned, and I'm also a speculative fiction writer, and I'm really excited to talk about romance arcs with Ming today. So let's just jump right into it. Did you want to start with your outline, bullet points?
Yeah, so I made a little outline about this because I guess I'm neurotic. Just talking a little bit about focusing on the emotional connection and the emotional side of a romance, since again, I very rarely feel physical attraction. And then so we'll also kind of cover how we make a reader invested in a romance, how to kind of draw them in, make them want to see characters end up together. And then how to develop a romance between the characters. So it's like, now that they're invested in the romance, how do you make that spark, make that romance happen? And then, I'm sorry, I'm scrolling down here. And I think that's broadly it. So for the first part of making a reader invested in the romance, we'll talk about getting the reader first invested in a character, and then talk about how a lot of times the romantic interest is someone that the reader can romantically also see themselves wanting to be in a relationship with. And then we'll also talk about using different romance tropes and how to kind of use that to spice things up.
Did you want to just
Get
dive into the first part? Yeah.
So, when I write romance, I focus a lot more on the emotional connection because once again, I don't feel the physical connection. I feel like I've talked about this too many times. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
I can just rep out there for my arrow ace peeps. The first thing is, how do we make a reader invest in a romance? And so one of the easiest ways is to get the reader invested in a character first. When you have a romantic relationship, it's typically between two people, sometimes more if it's a poly or a love triangle. And as long as you can get the reader invested in one of all the characters in a relationship that you're writing, then you've kind of already sold your romance. And so the reason is in our society, we oftentimes kind of link a relationship with happiness. We think, if someone ends up with someone, that is happiness, at least in the terms of stories that we see and are told. And so a lot of times a romance is presented as like a prize for a character to win at the end. So you think about a lot of romance stories or even other movies like action movies, superhero movies, the romance develops and then at the end they get together and it's part of the happy ending because the character went through a lot, they have suffered, and so they are rewarded with the romance at the end of the partner. I mean, yes, that's pretty messed up if you think about it, but it is kind of how we're kind of hardwired to think about stories and to think about romance. One of the downsides with that is that's also why maybe we don't get as much romance that explores a relationship after two characters get together, which I think is actually really interesting. I would love to see more stories like that. It's unfortunately not something we see that often. I do think it's because of the way we tend to think of romance as a reward. When you're invested in a character, you want to see the character's journey. You want to see them end up happy, typically. And so part of that ending up happy is ending up in that romantic relationship. So if you can get your reader invested, then you kind of already won the battle. One thing that kind of helps with that is if you want to see a character happy and you have this romance thing going on, you don't even need, I mean, I would recommend you do, but you don't even really need to flesh out the love interest, because then they're just kind of like an object and a goal. Once again, I don't recommend you do this, but you know, it is how it is. So a lot of times when we think about media, and I guess a lot of media I'm going to give is going to be on popular media. So it's going to be stuff like TV shows, movies, maybe a little less on books, anime, showing off that I'm a weeb. But if you think about superhero movies, you know, you think about like, you want to see Clark Kent end up with Lois Lane. You want to see Thor end up with Jane Foster in the movies. Realistically, like, I don't really think Jane has that much development in Thor movies. I don't think a lot of the love interests for superhero heroes get like that much development, but it's fine. Like, it's not, that's not the big deal. You still want to see them end up together because you're caring about mainly the other character, the main character, the superhero character. And we see that too with, like, for instance, with like romances for teen girls, like movies and stuff like that, where a lot of times, like, you know, you are, they're aiming it for teen girls. So you are a teen girl, you relate to the main character who's a teen girl, you want to see her happy with her love interest who's a jock or a hot boy, and you don't even need like that much for the other character beyond the fact that they are hot and an object of desire. Once again, kind of messed up, but it's like that is enough to carry the story forward. So it's really important that you make sure you get your reader invested in one of the characters, oftentimes the main character of the romance. And so that's something you should be able to do or want to do anyways with your story. So I think once you kind of get that going on, then then it's like you have the setup, and then you can kind of dive a little deeper. So kind of talking about the next part is, okay, let's say you've done your job as a writer. You have the readers invested in one of the characters. What do you do with the other character? So if you can get them invested in the other character, relate to them, etc., fantastic. One common thing that people write romances do is they have one character, typically the point of view character, is the character the reader will relate to. And then the other character is a character that the reader can see themselves falling in love with. So that what they end up doing is readers will then kind of put themselves, they'll like transfer themselves onto the main character to fall in love with the character in the novel. And so for the other character, if you make them romantically like each other, that's why it's like a lot of times they focus a lot on how hot the other character is. Once again, it doesn't really mean much for me because I don't really kind of feel that, but that's why we kind of see it a lot, where it's like the main character is typically like, oh, they're normal and clumsy, and but the other character is super hot, because you're supposed to put yourself, a normal, maybe clumsy person, into the main character while you go after that super hot boy that you're like, yes, I want them. And I'm talking about this a little bit from, like, I don't know, early 2000s YA. That's not at all the case right now. But that's also why I think a lot of times when you look at shipping pairings, characters from shows that people kind of like want to see together, we do see this often. So for instance, like Zutara, which is Zuko and Katara in Avatar. I feel like this may not be the case. I feel like Zutara fans are going to like come at me for this, but I feel like what happens is a lot of Zutara fans maybe like really like Zuko. They're like, Zuko is this person that like I have a crush on. I really like him. And then Katara is an easy person for them to put themselves in because she's like this fierce girl who fights for justice, and she's motherly and she's awesome. And so it's like, I want to be like a character like Katara. I want to be awesome like her. And also I have a crush on Zuko. And maybe they have chemistry in the show too that they also like. So it's like it's a really easy way to kind of get people really invested in romance, like beyond just the surface level, is if you can make it so the other character is someone that the readers want to date, and then that character, the other character, is one that they can see themselves in. So this is not something that you have to do. I say this because I typically like romances that are a little bit weird. Like I like really weird characters where like the dynamic is a little bit different from just like, oh, I'm a shy girl slash boy in love with a popular girl slash boy who is hot. The characters are a little bit weirder. Like I really like villains. Sometimes I like villain romances. I don't clearly see myself as a villain. I don't think like, yeah, I really want to be involved with that guy who destroyed a village and killed people. But it's like, you know, like these are just like alternative dynamics that I think are really interesting that don't quite fall into this particular narrative. So if you're writing it and you're like, listen, my characters are kind of weird, I don't like think I want readers to be like putting themselves in the place of one of the characters. I don't think the other character is someone that's very like, you know, like hot and like they'll fall in love with. Totally fine. A lot of really great romances out there don't technically fall into this mold. What you can also do to spice up a romance is kind of play around with romantic tropes. And so I'll talk about this a lot, but I think it's really great that, you know, if you write romance, you kind of do a little bit of soul searching and find out what kind of romances you like and why you like them. Like sometimes people are like, well, I don't even like romance. Like I feel like I need to write a romance because I need to, but like nothing really strikes me, and that's fine too. But if there are romances you like, I definitely think it's good to like sit down and examine what is it about that particular romance, that relationship that, you know, really you like, because those are things that you can put into your own writing. Back up a little bit, let's talk about romance tropes. And so what a trope is a type of storytelling that you see over and over again. A lot of people conflict tropes with cliches, thinking that cliches are bad because they're overdone. And so tropes are bad, and people like want to avoid tropes. They want to subvert all tropes because it's overdone and it's bad. That's not the case. Tropes are just a type of storytelling that you see. They can be handled well, they can be handled poorly. There's nothing wrong with using tropes. I think using tropes to draw in readers is great. One of the things that's great about tropes is it's a sense of familiarity. So if you use a trope that's well known, so for instance, like a trope that's well known for romance is enemies to lovers. So characters start out as enemies and then they end up as lovers. One of the great things you can do with that trope is the fact that when you use it, there is a familiarity for readers. So they're already kind of invested, and there's like certain things you can get away with storytelling because you're like, listen, we all know where this is going. We all know where this is going to end up, and so let's just stay with me. I'm bringing you around for a cool ride. And a lot of times too with romances, people who like romance oftentimes know what tropes they like. And so that's why I ask, if you're writing a romance, figure out what tropes you like. And so when readers of romance or people who like romance like those tropes, they will read a story for those tropes alone, even with like the characters are kind of meh. Like even if like I don't relate to it, like honestly the rest of the story is kind of eh, but like they have that trope that I love, readers will be invested for that trope alone. For instance, for me, I really like I'm a messed up person. I really like childhood best friends slash lovers to enemies. That is like a key thing for me, like the angst. And usually if you ask someone who likes a trope why they like it, they can give you a whole laundry list of like why that trope hits them. So for me, I really like that. And so there was like a series that I was emotionally invested in because they kind of had that childhood friend to enemies. And then I remember like as soon as that ended, because one of the character in that relationship ended up dying to save the other person, I like quickly lost interest in the other character. Like they still had their own character arc and stuff going on, but I was like, I realized I was like, honestly, I was just invested for that trope. Like after that trope is done, the rest is not, it's not that interesting. So being able to use tropes that are well known is really great because you can quickly suck in someone who likes that trope, who likes romance, without having to do as much heavy lifting. Obviously, I do recommend it. We all do heavy lifting. We want to make our writing as good as possible. But if you are weak at characters, which some of us are, it's totally fine. Tropes is a good way to get people invested if you're struggling with maybe creating memorable characters or distinct characters that that are different from each other. The other thing that's great about tropes too is like when I mentioned, some of those stranger romances where the characters are a little bit odd, they don't quite fit into the typical archetype of a character a reader relates to and a character that a reader can see themselves romantically attached to, is then you can really use those tropes to elevate that relationship. The next part I wanted to talk to, so this is like quite a big part, is how to develop a romance between characters. But before I do, I don't know, Lynn, if you want to jump in and like offer any of your perspective on what I've talked about or any questions?
No, I don't think so. I think that's a really good point about like tropes being able to carry a story. without like strong characterization in the mix. I just think that's like something to be really careful about as budgeting or burgeoning young writers, you know, more inexperienced, because you do want to sort of go down that path and use that hopefully to help develop your ability to write stronger characters, because I feel like that's a huge asset. That's what makes books or films or whatever, that's what makes them stick, in my opinion.
Characters are so important. Once you get readers invested in a character, you can get away with a lot. Like you can get away with a lot.
Oh yeah.
Like people get so much leeway as long as you've got strong characters.
Yeah.
I'm like now I'm like thinking, which is funny because I spent so much time focusing on my character for my novel, and then the agent feedback was like, I love everything, I love the characters, I'm not connecting with the plot. I'm like, yeah, that's probably
God damn it, that's so fucking annoying.
I was too focused on the character. So that's why I'm like, I know what I'm talking about when it comes to characters.
Yeah, so characters are important, but tropes are great too. I mean, who doesn't like a good trope?
So now getting back into it is how to develop a romance between characters. Now that you have characters that are going to be together romantically, how do you make that happen? How do you see that progression? Ask yourself, what do you value in a romance or in a relationship? And if some of you, for instance, have never been in a relationship before, ask yourself, what would you want to see in a romantic relationship? Or even like think about your really strong friendships. I mean, this may be like like I said, the arrow ace in me coming out, but it's like, think about your really strong friendships. And it's like, what about those relationships do you value? What is it that makes you think like, this is not just acquaintance, this is like a good friend that I can really trust? For me, one of the things that I really value in a relationship, and then I think also in a romantic relationship too, is being able to be supported in an emotionally vulnerable time. I think a lot of us maybe feel like there's certain aspects of ourselves that are like bad or dirty, we don't want to share because you're like, oh God, like because I'm a bad person. Having another character or another person like kind of validate that feelings and support them is like, it means a lot to me. And so when I write romance, I have those scenes a lot where it's that emotional connection of a character sharing something vulnerable about themselves and then the other person kind of like, you know, supporting them or validating their feelings. And so one of the things that I'm writing now is there's a romance story that I'm currently working on where the main character is autistic like me. And so one of the scenes that I want to write is him sharing the fact that, you know, because he's autistic, he feels like a burden on his family. Like he knows his family loves him, but he still always feels like, you know, maybe one day they'll wake up and realize I'm a burden, or maybe they like always just kind of realized it and they just never said it. And the other character kind of supporting about him being like, you're not a burden. So that's like a key moment where it's like that character, that main character with autism, starts to like the other character romantically. It's an emotional connection. It's not just like a physical, you know, I see them, they're hot and I'm in love. It's like there is an emotional connection now between me and that character. And so I think like, you know, when you're a writer, think about what you value in a relationship, what you value in a romance, and have those emotional connections between your characters on that. And so a follow-up with that is also think about what your character values in a romance or in a relationship, because, you know, there are things that we value, but we're ultimately not our characters. Think about your character's personality, their background, their history, and how does that impact how they make connections with other people. One of the things that, you know, like there's like a relationship that I wrote, and I think like Lynn, you have a similar relationship as well, where it's like, you know, and we see this commonly is like a character who is feared. So they grew up being feared, they've internalized that. And when they meet someone that doesn't fear them, that like accepts them, like that can mean a lot. What is it that will mean a lot to your character, and what was it that would make them respond to another person reaching out to them? The other thing too, and this is I guess bouncing a little bit back to maybe building a character, but it's you know, understanding your character and what kind of not just what type of a relationship is good for them, but also what type of a character would work well in that writing with them. So, you know, what is it about their personality? And so for me as a writer, I really love romances that are like opposites attract. I try to have, like, a lot of times in my character relationships, the characters tend to be a little bit opposite from each other in terms of personality. I feel like that it helps in terms of writing, just to make the characters pop a little bit in their interactions. They don't feel very samey. They feel a little more distinct that way, and that tends to be good in all writing, not just romance. You know, one character I had to really think about for their romance was like, this was a minor character, so I hadn't given it that much thought before, which is my fault. But this was a character that I had. So she is a princess. She's really ambitious. She's cold, and she can be cruel. Then you're smiling, you know who I'm talking about.
My favorite, yes.
I knew that her love interest was a childhood friend that she had grown up with. And I knew that for this character, who's, a princess and cold and vicious, one of her motivations and drives is having power to protect people who are important to her. In this case, her childhood friend, who she loves and has romantic interest in. Originally, I was like, kind of like, oh, what kind of character do I want to write? Right? I'm like, well, if she's like really like strong and, like ambitious and cold, like maybe someone who's like very soft and kind and, like easily, I don't know, bullied or whatever. So it's like then it's like she can protect her. Like it just always like felt a little off to me. But then I kind of like really sat down and thought about it because now I actually had to write it. And I was like, okay, I can make this dynamic work, but like, does it make sense for my character? And so I like went back to my character and I was like, would my character who's like this, who values power, who's cold and ambitious, would she fall in love with someone who's like, like very meek and like soft? And I was like, I don't think so. And I was like, well, maybe because they're childhood friends, so she grew up with, so it's okay. But it just didn't feel like very right to me. So I was like, okay, let me think again. This is what this character is. What does she value? And I was like, she values strength. That's very important to her. And it's like, it actually is like one of her big conflicts with her family is she looks down on family members that she thinks are weak. If she looks down on weakness, then she values strength. What kind of a person would she be drawn to romantically? She would want someone who she feels is strong. Like she sees that strength in them. So it's someone who's strong, who's stubborn, who, because she's a princess and she has that power, she probably would value someone who would stand up to her. And so that's how I like recrafted her love interest into someone who's like, a little bit snarky and sarcastic, who's very like a little bit droll, who stands by her side, and it's very like, she can see a dead body without flinching because she's like, whatever, we've seen dead bodies enough. So I kind of recrafted it based on what original the character is and what kind of person that character would fall in love with.
I just had like a quick little thing to say about the opposites attract, because I'm also very partial to that, especially in my sort of main pairings. It's great. And I feel like when I'm writing a romance arc or a relationship arc of any kind, even platonic, this was something that came up in my critique group Discord, where we were talking about how we like what were the most valuable lessons we've picked up about writing. And one person said, like Saba Tahir said, that she plots out all of her romances as arcs, as if they are plots of their own. I do that with character arcs generally, but for a relationship arc, I think it's great when you come at it with that like opposites attract starting point, and then they develop over time and like learn lessons from each other and pick up on each other, and that sort of allows them to overcome that initial hurdle of potentially being in conflict, allowing them to sort of bridge the gap and learn what they need to learn throughout the course of the story. And I love that with opposites attract. I think that's so much fun. That was all I had to say.
I'm really glad you brought that up. And that's excellent advice, because I was actually thinking that too last night when I was like thinking about this video. And that actually is something that I think I do with my writing. And I definitely like, I encourage people to like listen to this advice and try it out, at least try it out, is approach relationships, romantic or platonic, but definitely romantic if you're writing like one that's heavy, is approach it like an arc. Because when you do your plot, you'd be like, oh, act 1, act 2, act 3. How you want to do like the I can't even climax. Oh my, what's that word? The thing that rises, the tension with the climax and drama and things like that. And so I definitely recommend like try approaching your romance that way and being like, this is where my character starts out, this is where they end. How do I fill in the middle and have that escalation going up? And you could fill that in with, like I said, those moments that I talk about of like those connection. And so like your character's doing stuff for each other. And so you can like have those, so you can, with the whatchamacallit, the reader can see that accumulating relationship. That sounds really weird. The relationship progressing.
Yeah.
I think like a lot of times is when we see romance, I think for me, I'm very picky about romance because I don't typically feel the physical attraction. So when I read a romance, anytime they start talking about how hot the other character is, it very like doesn't really mean much to me, because I focus on the emotional part. And sometimes it's like I feel like I don't see the emotional part. I only see like the attraction part. And I think that's why I don't think there's anything wrong with insta love. I think a lot of times when people say they don't like insta love is because they're not, you get that initial physical attraction, but like maybe the author or the work or whatever isn't building up that emotional attraction that comes afterwards. And then when you have a relationship that's pure physical attraction with no emotional growth, you're left with a relationship that's very different than one with both. I don't want to like, I'm like, I don't want to say it's bad if you have a relationship that's purely carnal, because there's nothing wrong with that. But it's like if you're trying to write like a typical healthy romantic relationship, it's good to have like a balance of both. This is a really great point that leads into my next point, was making that distinction between relationship tropes versus developing a relationship. What are relationship tropes? So things like enemies to lovers. I'll be honest, I like darker stories, but one of my favorite is like childhood friends to lovers. I don't know why that like makes me so happy, but I love that so much. And then, you know, like other tropes, like I love bodyguard romance, like when one character is being guarded by their bodyguard and like they love each other, but like professionalism keeps them apart. I'm like, oh, I love that. And then same thing, like, you know, childhood friends to enemies, stuff like that. And so these are great tropes. A lot of people use those tropes. A lot of people market their story, like marketing markets the story with these tropes.
Oh yeah.
But I think one thing that's really important is like, this is what I see with weak romances or romances that I'm not into, is people are mistaking a trope for developing the romance. People think that if I have them as childhood friends and then they end up as like lovers or like enemies and then lovers, that's it, that's a relationship. No, it's a trope. You haven't developed the relationship. You still need to develop the relationship, even though you have that trope as an overlay. So I would personally like use that trope as like a structure to structure your emotional development or the development of the relationship. And once again, I don't really want to get into too much into like telling versus showing, because it's a very long thing. But I think a lot of times when people say like they're not really connecting the romance, they don't really understand it, that's when we get maybe like paragraphs talking about how one character really loves the other character. But we, the readers, aren't being shown why. I think a lot of times the reason is because they're using these tropes as a shorthand and not actually developing a relationship, or they're just telling you the characters like each other without showing through actual like scenes and events of characters falling in love with each other. And the other thing too is I think it's good to show on the page, as well as for you, the writer, to understand why two characters like each other. Have what character A's name, character B's name, and put like write a list of why they would like the other person. I see that a lot because romances are written, you know, where the main character is someone the reader is supposed to empathize with and see themselves in, and then the love interest is the one that the reader is supposed to fall in love with. You can obviously see why the main character the reader is empathizing with would fall in love with the love interest. But I just don't see in romances that aren't hitting quite as heavily why the other character would like the other character back. And so another thing too about developing a relationship is characters showing each other affection. Once again, I'm focusing more on the non-physical part, so like the emotional side, the connection side, stuff like that. Some ways you could show this is character A doing something special for character B that's meaningful to character B. One thing I think about is, for instance, you know, Beauty and the Beast, where the Beast gives Belle or shows Belle the library. Right. That's like a big scene because it's like it's been built up that Belle loves books. You know that about the character going in. And so at that scene where the Beast shows her or like gives her the library, like, you know how much that means to Belle. You can see why that's so emotionally powerful. I also feel like that could slightly slide in because a lot of people like books themselves. Once again, you can see yourself as Belle. People think about doing something special as in like, we think about ourselves, like what would be special to me as the author, as a person. But you got to make sure it's special to the character, and it's really important that you build that up beforehand. So when that happens, the reader knows it's special to the character. And so something else too is like this, like, I love this. I think this is more of a trope than maybe like this is not like a hardcore romance or anything. This is like a trope that I love. So I'm going to talk about it, is character A doing something for character B that they normally wouldn't do for anyone else. So this is showing that like character B is special to character A. Like that gets me in the heart. I'm just like, oh, I love this. And so, you know, like some simple stuff like, you know, if character A is like always described as like wearing, you know, like not fancy clothes, very casual clothes, but then like if they go on a date, they take care to dress up for character B, like that, you know, that's really nice. That means that like, they think it's special. And I want to like stress this, I'm not talking about those like makeover scenes. I have opinions about those scenes, but it's just more of like, I am choosing to do something special for this person
on your own. Yeah.
The other thing too is like, one thing that, for instance, for me, that I feel like makes an emotional connection, like not just romantically, but like friendship wise or whatever, is like, because I'm someone, like I said, who values time spent with people. So like spending time with people, but also like having conversations, being able to communicate things with each other, and things that like are maybe a little more personal. Like I feel like once you get to that stage where you can communicate personal things with someone, that means I feel like your relationship is at a higher level than before, where it's a lot more like surface talk and you can't communicate stuff like that. Having scenes where one character is sharing about their life, like personal details about their life, and this kind of ties back with like supporting each other at emotional vulnerable points where they're giving details about either the trauma or their growth or whatever, just small things where it's like you can tell that's special. It means something that they're sharing this with someone. I think those are like really great ways to build up a relationship. So then it's like you can see them falling in love. No judgment, but I wrote like a high school romance when I was in high school. I remember like the way I had tried to build up a relationship was, character A was in love with character B, or like they fall in love with each other. One thing was character B was like a super like golden boy, like was very like, oh yeah, like I'm good at sports, at school, at everything. And then it turns out, he's actually has a lot of pressure from his parents. He's very stressed. He's always overwhelmed, and he can't really say no to people. So he takes on more work for other people that he doesn't want to. I wrote scenes where that character and my main character, like initially it was just them just showing that they can interact and be friendly with each other. Like this is like a nice, normal, they're interacting, then like showing the protagonist standing up for character B when they're being kind of like, oh, like, when you want to be like, you're like, I don't really want to say yes to this, but I feel like I have to. And then like having the protagonist kind of stand up for that. This is like to show that, okay, like this is why character B is going to like the protagonist. And then it accumulates in a scene where character B is, because he lives in an abusive household, is kicked out of his house. He doesn't have anywhere to go. And he kind of just like calls the main character being like, I'm so sorry, like, can I crash over at your place? And being like, yes, of course. And so they stay over and they talk and kind of like, that emotional and connection and stuff like that. And like, these are things I wanted to kind of like build up to show that like, that was also a very weird romance I wrote where I think the confession comes at midway and then the last half is them dealing with their relationship. But like, that's what I wanted to show without, even though it was like not from character B's perspective, it was all character A's perspective, you can see why character B falls in love and how they fall in love with character A. That's why I think it's good to kind of see it as an arc and have those points in there where you're like, where are scenes that you can have character A fall in love with character B and character B fall in love with character A and have that throughout. And obviously if you can write a scene where both are falling in love with each other, then wow, you are a genius writer, and I wish I had that brain. I think that's super important, is once you have your characters down, once you have the tropes you want down, is then you plan out your romance arc and you plan out those scenes, so then you can actually progress that romance and have a super awesome thing. I think that was mostly it for for my notes of like things I wanted to talk about with romance. And again, this is a very brief, it's not even that brief, but it is a very brief topic about romance. We didn't really get into like a lot of the more nitty gritty stuff, but yeah, I don't know then if you have any comments or questions.
No, I feel like everything you went over, like, yeah, it is more of a basic overview, but that is so great because I am like allosexual, so it's not something I consider. Like, I do look at someone and feel that physical attraction. I'm also a Libra, so I'm like, all right, I'm done with you after like 2 weeks. It's sort of like a perspective I've never considered, but in terms of writing, that's just such a valuable and not simplistic, but simplified and helpful way to look at it.
I don't know if this video is already like too long, but I would love to hear maybe your thoughts on, like, if you want to talk about it, about how you approach romance from like an allo perspective.
Yeah, in terms of dealing with physical attraction in writing, I mean, everyone like is attracted to different things physically, and I feel like it's not just, I don't know, maybe I'm weird or something, but it's not like, one trait. It's the sum of the person as a whole. I do think that I get attracted to like the idea of someone's personality, or so it's like, I don't look at a picture of like, I don't even know who's an attractive person. Name like an actor, I guess like Hugh Jackman, and think, wow, that's a really like hot guy. I'd like to date him. I'm like, ooh, he's an actor. He's like really talented. It's sort of like the idea of the person beyond just their looks as well. So I think you mentioned earlier when you were discussing like writing a character that readers can also fall in love with and having that be the love interest and having that suck readers in. It's like the idea of the person. Like it is a little bit more instant than what I think you've been describing, where it's not like learning to love that person over time or like discovering things about them. You're just like drawn to this like idea of a person who is a character. So that's like what I find as a reader. As a writer, I try hard, I kind of try to make it more of like an experience and a growth thing. But I think the starting point might be a little different, if that makes sense. Like the point where you realize that this is going to be a romance arc.
That's actually really interesting. I haven't really, and you know, like I said, because when I write, it's from my own perspective. I haven't really like considered that. It's just hard for me because I'm like, I just don't understand the aloe experience. But I'm like, I'm so interested in how that would like kind of change the arc, and like when compared with how I would handle it from my.
Yeah, it's so like fascinating to me to discover how all these different perspectives affect how people write, and it just like further solidifies my very, very strongly held belief that no two writers will write the same story, even if they're given the exact same character set concept. It doesn't matter. We're all going to write something different. And that's fucking amazing. I do want to like do more soul searching because I also like don't understand the aloe experience. So I feel like even my aloe experience would be different from someone else who is also aloe. And
but a book that I have read, I thought handled romance really well, written from an aloe perspective, is Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. So one thing is the book is a love triangle, which I will say I personally am not that invested in love. Like it's not a trope that I personally enjoy, but I handled really well, and the relationship growth was well done. I felt like the chemistry was well written. And I didn't really dive into chemistry for this particular video just because I'm like, well, as an arrow ace person, I don't know if I'm like the best equipped person to talk about chemistry. But and you know, because there's a love triangle, there are two very different love interests that fit the common YA tropes, but it was just handled so well. I was so emotionally invested in the characters and the romance. I kind of know who I want the main character to end up with, but I'm also like, I also like don't know because I would feel so bad for the other character, and she has like such good chemistry with both of them, but like different kinds of chemistry. So wait, quick segue into writing here, because I guess I mostly talked about like single type of relationships. I didn't really talk about love triangles or poly relationships. One thing that's really neat that when I see characters do, and I know like Fonda Lee has talked about this as well when she talked about developing characters, is having characters show different facets or different parts of their personality with different characters. I feel like love triangles for me are more interesting when the character in the middle is showing different sides of their personality with the different characters, so they have a very different relationship with the characters. I think Legendborn did such a great job of doing that. It's not even a romance book, you know, it's like a, you know, contemporary fantasy book, but I think like for people who maybe want to read a book with a romance that I, as a gray arrow ace person, thought was really well done from like an aloe perspective, I really recommend Legendborn. Are there any like good ones that you read with romances that you feel like have been really well handled?
Like books? Hold on, let me check my story graph because I can never like remember what I've read recently. Nothing. What I did just read Circe by Madeline Miller. That one has a number of relationships, and like all of them suck, and like they're so bad for the characters until the last one, which was I thought was very sweet. But I wasn't like deeply invested in it. I was just like, oh God, good for her. Thank goodness.
I think Circe is another one too, where it's like you can see Circe's relationship, like the relationship, the dynamic personality is a little bit different with each person.
Yeah, they are different.
So I think that one kind of maybe plays in my main thing where it's like I don't think I like imagine myself in love with any of her love interests. I had a strong connection with Circe. I wanted her to be happy. So like you said,
exactly.
Happy. Yeah, and so that's kind of, I guess, like how I approach writing romance. Obviously, it's not the best way or the only way, just more of my perspective as someone who doesn't really quite feel physical attraction and focuses more on the emotional side of things. And obviously, like, always need to stress, I don't speak for any community. I speak solely for myself. I can't represent a community. If you're wondering about how to write an arrow ace character, I don't ask me if your story idea is okay, because like once again, I don't represent the whole community. But I really hope this is helpful for people. I hope like this kind of gives maybe people an idea of how to start working on a romance, or if they already have a romance written and they're wanting to go in and do edits and stuff like that, like maybe this will help you see some things that you could improve on. Huge thanks for Lynn for inviting me onto this channel and talking about it. I love writing. I love talking about writing. I guess if you like these types of videos, like, let us know in the comments below.
Yay! That was perfect. Yeah, thank you so much for coming on, Ming. That was such a good discussion. I feel really happy. And I definitely want to do more of these like discussion type videos with you in the future if you're down. So yes, do let us know in the comments below what subjects you like to see or any sort of, I don't know, suggestion like that. Thank you so much for watching. Oh, my voice. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys in 2 weeks.
So then,
Bye.
if you see, on the other hand, that existence is musical in nature, that is to say that it is not serious.
Oh, I also have,
play.
oh, this is so embarrassing because I turned in my tiger draft with this and I'm noticing it now as I'm reading through, but I would just start a sentence and then not finish it.
Oh, I do that too.